Hi, my name's Millie and I'm a staff nurse working in paediatric critical care in Oxford. I'm talking to you today about my experiences in COVID and especially about being redeployed and what support our unit gave. I'm sure, although I'm talking about my experience, I know that a lot of my colleagues had the same thing, and I'm sure some of what I say will resonate with you and your organisation within the Thames Valley and the Wessex region, and to be honest, probably worldwide. Probably just like yourselves, I too have been redeployed on a shift-by-shift basis to work on a COVID adult ICU unit. At one point in the second peak, I was moving about twice a week. As well as this, we had to face the challenge of moving our whole paediatric critical care service across the hospital, and this happened in both the first and the second wave, and I'm sure many of you have experienced the same thing. So I qualified in July 2020, and as you can imagine, it hasn't really been plain sailing. So I've been on this unit for around a year, but actually 7 months as a staff nurse. First, I'm going to talk about some of the difficulties that I've found throughout COVID and being redeployed. So as I'm newly qualified, I'm only really just learning the ropes about paediatric critical care and looking after those critically ill children. And it's been really stressful having to try and learn all of this, as well as go into a whole different segment of nursing, let alone look after adults. So that's been very overwhelming because I've suddenly had to change my mindset into learning about adult critical care, as well as really just finding the basics of my paediatric critical care nursing skills. Also, being a newly qualified member of staff here means that I haven't completed the intensive care unit course. My skill mix means that I might be a more disposable member of staff, and although no one has ever said this to me, this is just how I might feel sometimes, and unfortunately I think this meant that I was moved quite often compared to senior members of staff. When I moved to adult intensive care, sometimes I did have a very overwhelming sense of responsibility. I recall at one point I was sort of in charge of 5 ventilated patients, and it was a bit of a moment of like, oh my goodness, this is my responsibility, and that was quite overwhelming. And I think definitely stemming from that, I definitely experienced like some imposter syndrome. So at points I felt like, oh, I'm nowhere near qualified or skilled enough to be doing this. There's so many more people who are more qualified, who are better than me, who will be able to do this maybe better, but that's just completely the imposter syndrome that started talking. Obviously, like, the unfamiliar environment was quite scary because like I wouldn't have ever set foot into an adult ICU unit before. So as well as having to learn all the medical terminology that they might use that's different, all the general practice, all the medications, you didn't really know where your equipment was or your emergency drugs or anything like that. Obviously, every time you go in, you don't have the opportunity or the time to spend, you're in there and you're doing as much care as you possibly can in that moment. So that was really overwhelming. So what else I found really exhausting, and I know many others did as well, was your like momentum to continue learning. And it's not just learning about A and B, it's learning about, you know, all these new experiences, as well as having to get to know a whole new team, a whole new nursing team. And your brain is just constantly having to, you're being a bit like a sponge, and you're constantly having to like take in all this information, and then you think, okay, I might be getting to grips a tiny bit with that, and then you might not go in for another week, and then you go the next week and it's an entirely different new team, and the nurse in charge like doesn't necessarily have the time to come and give you the input that, you know, might have happened pre-COVID. So everybody's working on this like adrenaline level, and it's really, really exhausting because your body is constantly on this adrenaline like motion, and because you're constantly in this state, you never really switch off. So even though you've got, we did 2 hours in PP, 2 hours out. In your 2 hours out, you were constantly trying to document everything that you did when you were in there for 2 hours, because you didn't have the opportunity. So your brain is constantly like this, and you never really switch off. And it was really exhausting. So the emotional load was nothing like I'd experienced before, and a lot of my colleagues are also saying that, especially when you're in a situation where sometimes you didn't know these patients' names because you were so busy at the task that you had to deliver to these patients, and it completely dehumanises those patients. And I think that's difficult because it goes against, in nursing, everything you're taught about personalisation of care and patient-centred care. So that was really tough, and I think we're all only just starting to really process, I think, some of the situations that we witnessed and dealt with. So what was really difficult following on from that point is that you couldn't really say anything that you knew would comfort that patient, or like if they were, you didn't know their wife's name particularly unless you had the time to go and look this information up, which you rarely did, and you didn't know what their interests were or what they wanted to watch, maybe on an iPad. So that was really difficult too. So as you can imagine, we had lots of different members of staff from lots of different areas that were mobilised in order to help these adult critical care areas. And part of that was there were some very senior ward nurses who were moved in a nurse 3 capacity. And I've had some very odd situations that I found quite difficult at the time, where I was having to teach some critical care specific skills to some very senior members of the Children's Hospital, and some of them were even my mentors when I was a first year student like 3 years ago. So that was a really weird power balance, and it was fine, but it was one of those moments that I thought, oh, this is a bit... I think that point really demonstrates that actually there's always knowledge to share, and it's not about, always a senior member of staff teaching a very junior member of staff, that actually it can be the other way around, and that there is always knowledge to share. I'm going to briefly mention PPE because I'm sure you've all had enough of it, but obviously that's added to the exhaustion, the physical strain of helping in COVID ICU, and my false 8 mask was my best friend. So to aid our skill and competence, Paediatric Critical Care here adapted a skills and competency booklet that originally came from London, and this booklet basically detailed like the roles and responsibilities of all team members that can be expected in COVID ICU. So for example, we had the names Nurse 1, Nurse 2 and Nurse 3 and support worker. So Nurse 1 was typically a adult ICU critical care nurse, and then a Nurse 2 would be a critical care nurse but maybe a junior member in adults, or potentially a paediatric critical care nurse. And then Nurse 3 was typically a adult ward nurse or a children's ward nurse, or a supporting staff would be like a healthcare assistant or assistant practitioner. This booklet was a really helpful guide, and it really also helped establish our roles and responsibilities, especially at the beginning when it was all new territory. This booklet also meant that I had the confidence to stand up for myself and the confidence in knowing what my role and responsibility are, and it was almost like a protection and evidence that I could fall back on for this. At Oxford University Hospitals, we also have a way of reporting excellence, and this is alongside our incident reporting system. On paediatric critical care, we have been particularly good at utilising this service, and it's been a really good opportunity to say well done and thank you to our colleagues or adult colleagues or supporting staff. I know that not just myself but my colleagues also really benefited from receiving these excellence reports. It helped me feel that somebody was noticing the efforts that I was putting in, and although it was obviously really difficult, that actually it was going noticed. And one of our sisters held sessions on Teams, and this was twice weekly, and this was an opportunity for us to ask any questions, to voice any sort of concerns, or even to come up with ideas about how we could resolve any issues that any of us were experiencing.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm one of the sisters and the lead nurse for the Children's Critical Care Outreach team. I just wanted to talk about, so in the lockdown in the country from December to April, I had to shield at home, which was quite challenging. And so one of the things I really wanted to do was try and support my colleagues at the hospital, even though I was working remotely. I liked the idea of being somebody that could listen to people's concerns, people's worries, just be an ear for people. So I offered twice weekly drop-in sessions via Microsoft Teams so that nurses could drop in and out as they please, just if people wanted to have a safe space to be able to talk. I then fed that feedback anonymously back to the rest of the Band 7 team. We had created this meeting purely because of the pandemic every Tuesday, where we would all meet and discuss concerns, any updates on the unit, because things were changing daily at that point. All the feedback that I gave on those meetings I would then collaborate and put into a Word document, and then straight after that meeting I would send out the questions that had been raised from the feedback sessions and the answers that had been provided by the sisters and the matron of our unit. I also provided one-to-one sessions, so people that needed a little bit more support or to talk through things. So I was able to organise Teams meetings to do that as well.
It was also a really safe space that you could go to address any concerns with your own well-being, or you didn't necessarily have to have an issue you wanted to address. You might have just wanted to catch up and an opportunity to say that you're acknowledging that you're not feeling great at the moment. So I think that was a really positive thing for a lot of members of paediatric critical care here. So two of our sisters put some resources up on Teams that all of us could access, and in this was information about how to look after adults and specific skills that they do over there that we wouldn't necessarily do in peds. So for example, how to prepare a patient ready for proning, and also so the adult ICU here in Oxford have different ventilators. We also had to use different pumps. So the way redeployment worked here in Oxford was we had a staff movement list, and we took it in turns to move, taking into account the skill mix that will be left on paediatric critical care, as well as who's been going frequently. So this was really helpful because it meant that you could sort of predict when you'd be moved, and although you had the feeling of dread, or you knew it would be your turn next time you were on shift, that wasn't a pleasant feeling. But equally, I think if we didn't have that, we'd feel like we wanted something like that, because if you moved yesterday and you're in the next day, you'd almost be certain that you would be staying in paediatrics that day. So it sort of gave you a peace of mind, but sort of didn't. But I think without it, it would have been harder. So we would get a WhatsApp text on a no reply group, so your phone wouldn't be buzzing a lot. And we'd get a WhatsApp text about an hour before starting shift, whether that's night or day, and basically saying, please can Millie go to adult ICU today? And I'm not going to lie, this text sort of put me off my breakfast sometimes, but it was really good to know before you got to work, what headspace you were going to be in. It gave you time to prepare. The staff I had the pleasure of helping in adult ICU have always been supportive. Not just I haven't just found that, but I think everyone here from PCC that's moved there has also found that. They've been really respectful of our boundaries, but also encouraging. They've been really good teachers, really good leaders, and despite facing difficulties and challenges themselves, they always made sure that we were comfortable in our own shoes. We felt supported, and we were able to ask them questions and seek the support when we needed it. They also made the effort to know our names, and that really helped. And for example, I wore tinsel in my hair on Christmas Eve, and they always remember me as Millie who wore tinsel. On one occasion I had a particularly difficult shift in a different ICU unit at the hospital, and despite this, I was really encouraged by our matron and our senior nurses who are around on shift to contact our divisional lead nurse, and I ended up having a meeting in his office at 7 a.m. This was obviously really scary and daunting, and especially after a 12-hour night shift. But actually I felt really empowered by my colleagues to go and speak about the issues I've had and address them and talk about how can we make change about this. So although that was really difficult, it was a good step in empowering myself to speak, but also having the responsibility to speak up for, I felt like I was speaking up for other newly qualified Band 5 nurses. So having to do this and talk to our lead divisional nurse, I think it definitely has taught me and enhanced my communication skills that otherwise I don't think I would have actually learnt for years. So that's a positive. So just like everyone, the activities or coping mechanisms that we would do in normal life couldn't happen. So our wellbeing team sort of addressed that.
Hi, I'm Charlie. I'm the matron for PCC in Oxford. With regards to wellbeing during the pandemic, over here we had a really good psychology team that provided one-to-one and group sessions for our team. We also installed a wellbeing team for the pandemic led by one of our sisters, Kate Powell, and her alongside the rest of the team organised loads of activities to kind of boost team morale and improve wellbeing of our staff, which included some exercise regimes, and we did a Zoom CrossFit session, we did some wellbeing walks, we did quite a lot of quizzes, standard Harry Potter, pub quiz kind of thing, but we also did a kind of get to know your colleagues quiz, which revealed some interesting guilty pleasure songs, including our lead consultant's secret love of Taylor Swift. We did a spa night with Temple Spa to help us with our mask need. We did some cocktail evenings. Our lovely place specialist Paula ran some sort of activities and arts and crafts sessions for our staff that had children. That really helped with those that were homeschooling at the time, just to have a little bit of a break away from doing all that, to do something nice that was run by someone with a familiar face. We did some sort of team cake afternoon catch-ups, and generally a lot of virtual team building and team sessions to try and connect us all together as a team and do something that was outside of work, a little bit different. And
so in summary, I think we've all had to just go with the flow. I've learnt to accept what I can't control, notice what I can control, and whether that's controlling things for myself or my colleagues or the patients. But I think it's definitely been a learning experience, whether that's learning through really difficult times or some positive change that's come out. So I think moving forward, I've had to do this. I haven't really had a choice, but at the end of it, on reflection, I've actually accelerated a lot of, I've acquired a lot of skills that I wouldn't otherwise have done at this stage in my career, but also recognising that there are skills that I have missed and I haven't learnt, and identifying them, I haven't had a bronchiolitis winter or anything like that. So on one hand I've got acquired these skills, and on the other hand I'm beginning to identify what are the gaps in my knowledge. So in summary, I'm really proud to work for a team who I think we've supported each other really well and come up with all these great things to make the uncontrollable more manageable. And I'm really looking forward to learning about what paediatric critical care is, without COVID. I would be just as glad to, put all this behind us, and I'm sure you will be too.